Belgium and the Industrial Revolution, presented by Miquel, Jorge, and Alessio. The Industrial Revolution was a process of change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing, by the substitution of labor for capital. The reasons why it appeared first in Britain can be reversed to understand why Europe wasn't yet ready, this being the fractured state of politics and the constant warfare carried out between neighboring nations and principalities. In the 18th century alone, there were over 30 battles, wars, and other conflicts, a figure that doubled by the end of the 19th century. Wars sucked up funds, created diseases, redirected resources, and so on. The constant fighting for power and independence meant less cooperative and focused efforts on mass production and innovation on a national level. Politically, Europe was quite conservative, and the constant fighting for power and independence meant less cooperative and focused efforts on mass production and innovation on a national level. Nevertheless, thanks to a few key individuals, industrialization managed to pop up in some parts of Europe, such as Belgium, which was the first country to embrace it in continental Europe. Belgium before the Industrial Revolution already showed remarkable talent in textile through figures such as William Cockerell, who set up the first wool spinning machines in Liège, and metallurgy. The region of Flanders became well known for producing textiles, specifically linen. In turn, the region of Wallonia had displayed a well-established sector in the field of metallurgy. The Belgians also showed great ability as traders. There had been plentiful trade with France since the Napoleonic Wars, and again when it became a close partner with Britain in trading cotton. Therefore, Belgium had the potential to become an industrialized country. As previously stated, Belgium was indeed the first country in continental Europe to embrace industrialization. The reason why they industrialized so early came from the geography. Belgium had a large reserve of iron and coal, which were vital resources for industrialization. In addition, its close proximity to Britain and its strong trading relationship with her allowed new technologies to subsequently arrive in Belgium, like for example the arrival of the first steam engine, based on the design of British inventor Thomas Newcomen, which began to be used in the coal mines of the Belgian city of Liège. The engine allowed an increase in the production of coal and led to the increased usage of steam engines. In the following years, the use of steam engines expanded, and by 1727 the machine began to be used in the mines of Mons and Charleroi. The use of steam engines led to new bounds when it came to the coal output of Belgium. Belgium's multiple rivers and large railways also served as highways for goods and became a vital part for transportation and distribution. In order to expand its internal market and promote transit, the Belgian state invested heavily in the creation of a railroad network from 1834 on. This infrastructural boom connected the Belgian economy with neighboring markets such as Germany and France, and it created important orders for Belgium's coal mines and iron sector, pushing industrialization further. We also have to highlight the multiple inland waterways that were built. Rivers like the Sombra became catalyzed to carry coal from Wallonia to northern France. These factors encouraged industrialization, because the resource and transport costs were very low while wages were 40% higher compared to other European countries. This made them relatively uncompetitive on the international market. In order to compete and compensate for their high wages, Belgium's economy was obliged to increase its productivity. They achieved this by substituting the relatively expensive factors for cheaper ones, such as labor for capital, using coal as the primary source of energy, and the reduction of transport costs, which allowed the international market to converge in prices and wages.
On the financing area, industrialization transformed the structure of the economy as a whole, be it with a constant growth of industrial capacity or coal mining, among many other aspects. Critical to this success was the action of the two main banks of Belgium, the Société Générale pour Favoriser Industrie Nationale in 1922, the world's first joint stock investment bank, and the Banque de Belgique in 1835, which engaged industrial finance from the outset. These two banks account for about two-thirds of the capitalization of all industrial credit banks. Other smaller banks existed, but they were mostly local. These two banks faced no competition from incorporated banks, and the government had the power to grant banking charter, and thus greatly restricted the entry into the financial sector. This bank assisted and encouraged firms to adopt the corporate form to raise large amounts of external finance, helped them raise large sums of capital, and invested much of the capital in industrial equity. This investment turned out to be very profitable, reaching the peak in 1860. The Société Générale and the Banque de Belgique were the first example of universal bank, those which provide a wide variety of comprehensive financial services, both commercial and investment related. Among many others, they created financial trusts, holding companies which managed the bank industrial portfolios, and focused on the coal and metallurgical industry as well as the heavy industry, organizing the Belgian colonies as part of an imperial economic network. Regarding government intervention on financing, so far we have shown that size and market power are necessary conditions for banks to perform a catalytic role. However, we have not tried to answer the question of where this came from. One potential concern with analysis is that we have omitted variables. Are strong banks merely the result of a strong government? Clearly, the government played a role in the industrialization process. However, we would argue that the government itself cannot be credited for being the catalyst to industrialization, nor were the strong banks directly created by the government. Nonetheless, there are some interesting interactions between the bank and the government worth noticing. The periods of industrialization occur in a period of relative political stability. Government, therefore, can be credited for providing an environment that allows all the different industrial activity to unfold. In Belgium, the emergence of a strong bank was mostly a historic coincidence. The Dutch king Wilhelm I created the Société Générale shortly before Belgium's independence, in 1830. While the king bought a large part of the share and retained the right to nominate its governor, the bank was fundamentally a private company. The new independent Belgian government quickly agreed that the foundation of a second largest bank, the Banque de Belgique, should counter the power of the Société Générale. There was a delicate political balance between the large bank and the government. When the government created the Banque Nationale in 1850, it was a deliberate move to take away control of monetary policy from the Société Générale and the Banque de Belgique. Even within the Société Générale, there was a delicate task of balancing the political influence. The War Société Générale maintained a bipartisan structure, where both leading parties maintained board seats, irrespectively of which party was currently in power. Government trade policies. Speaking of the role of the government in the promotion of industrialization, it is important to note that from the 1850s on, the process of industrialization was accompanied by a free trade regime. Inspired by the repeal of the Corn Laws in Great Britain, was operating in the context of budgetary problems. Both liberal and Catholic politicians embraced the idea of the free trade and less state interventionism. The laissez-faire theory was not put into full potential practice, but with regard to the promotion of export, trade barriers were brought down between 1857 and 1870. Belgian technological leadership in wooden and iron industry allowed the state to remain one of the less protected European economies throughout the rest of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Only in 1924 did Belgium issue a rather moderate import quota, before it turned out to significant protection in the 1930s, coinciding with the protectionist tendency during the interwar period. This export-oriented economy came under pressure during the international economic depression between 1874 and 1895, when cheap American and Russian grain flooded Europe. During this period, European states were putting up agricultural trade barriers, often followed by industrial protection. For Belgium, the return to protectionism in states such as Germany (1879) and France (1881) could close off important foreign markets for coal, iron, fibers, and machinery, the main export from 1950 on. Eventually, the international depression did not trigger a severe Belgian export crisis, nor did it cause a turn to protectionism or stimulate a significant conversion toward the chemical and electric industries of the Second Industrial Revolution. Compared to the evolution of industry in Germany, Belgium remained a country of coal, iron, metal, and machine construction industry.
The expansion of public education and industrialization went hand in hand. After all, it was Adam Smith himself who argued, "An instructed and intelligent people besides are always more decent and orderly than an ignorant and stupid one." Before the Industrial Age, provision of formal schooling was scarce virtually everywhere. With the growth of industry, support for public education grew, and the result was a transformation of schooling from limited provision into a widespread and hierarchical educational system. We can explain this from an economic point of view, as the result of industrialization, and therefore the increase in productivity, generated an economic surplus which allowed the labor force to invest in education, with the objective of improving the human capital and bringing productivity to an even higher level. Precise relationships between industrialization and the rise of public education are difficult to pin down, however. Nevertheless, gains in income and wealth during the Industrial Age made possible larger public expenditures for the welfare of the general population, and all governments considered schooling in their expanded social calculus. The Industrial Revolution in Belgium, however, had a price. Labor conditions equaled the horrific conditions of those in Britain. Low pay, long working hours, which were usually more than 13 a day, integrating and unsafe conditions, child labor. Labor unions had not existed since 1791 because of the Le Chapelier law that prohibited trade guilds, which were a predecessor of unions. But thankfully, this was not like this forever. In the late 19th century, labor unions began finally to gain strength and to voice for better conditions for the workers. During the Industrial Revolution, a lot of big privately owned companies were built. The sectors that flourished the most during this period were the mining sector, the metallurgic, and the textile sector. An example of a company that excelled during this period was William Cockerill's, as mentioned before. In 1799, William Cockerill installed the first woolen spinning machine on the continent in Verviers, thereby laying the foundations for a booming textile industry in the region. Cockerill then built an engineering factory to make the machines in Liège. Some years later, his son John began to produce iron in nearby Seringue on the river Sambre, and the business expanded rapidly. Cockerill Sambre is still producing steel today under the roof of the gigantic ArcelorMittal concern. In conclusion, the industrialization of Belgium was mainly due to their textile, coal, and iron industries. Its success due to the following reasons: an abundance of iron and coal, the availability of driving force. The territory is crossed by fast-flowing rivers that provided the energy required. Its geographical location. The proximity to England facilitated the transfer of technology, and the proximity to France provided an external market immediately. Its industrial tradition. The state also contributed to industrialization, investing in transportation infrastructure and promoting the creation of investment banks, facilitated the development of joint stock companies and the entry of foreign capital into the country. And finally, we find its active role of the banks of Belgium. In the beginning, Belgium developed textile and wool industries. In the last years of the 18th century, the textile industry began to be mechanized. The use of steam became widespread, and some companies began to manufacture textile machinery. The coal industry developed mainly in the western part of the territory, where machines were used, and in the 18th century, coal was mainly destined for local consumption and for export to France. The modernization of the coal industry brought increases in production and productivity. Large private companies were formed. Thus, Belgium was the main coal producer on the European continent until the 1850s. The Industrial Revolution meant a break with tradition, and there was a separation between old and new factories. By the 1830s, the use of the steam engine was already widespread in both textiles and mining. The expansion of an extensive railroad system supported the growth of the coal industry as well. The Industrial Revolution in Belgium became a significant event in world history. It meant a break with tradition and a separation between old and new factories. Belgium became a gateway for the Industrial Revolution to flow into Europe, which sparked worldwide economic revolution that led to the creation of the modern world.